Motor graders are routinely used by city and county road agencies in Texas. This training video promotes safety and productivity and the use of motor graders. It was recorded during a live training session conducted on March 26, 2009 by the Texas Engineering Extension Service, or TEEX, a member of the Texas A&M University system based in College Station, Texas. This training session was part of an 8-hour TEEX workshop using motor graders to maintain roads, which was conducted in coordination with the Texas Association of Counties as part of the Local Technical Assistance Program, or LTAP, funded by the Texas Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration. This video solely reflects the observations and opinions expressed by very experienced personnel based on knowledge they gained through years of hands-on experience. It is our goal to share their collective expertise to benefit the productivity and safety of city and county road agencies. Cities and counties operate motor graders made by a variety of manufacturers, and the age of the equipment may vary widely. This video presents generic information, and it is important that city and county road agencies follow the specific instructions, operator's manual, and the information provided by the manufacturer of their equipment. The information presented in this video is meant only as a training aid and does not cover all the different aspects of operating and inspecting the motor grader. As always, check with your supervisor or consult your local vendor about any specific operation or inspection questions you may have. We recommend supervisors present this video one section at a time and then follow up with a discussion of the points presented during that segment. The speakers in this presentation are James Holt, TEEX Heavy Equipment Training Coordinator; Russell Sharp, Volvo Construction Equipment, Romco Equipment Company; Ernesto Galindo, Texas Association of Counties; Marvin Epperly, John Deere, RDO Equipment Company; and Charlie Cotton, Caterpillar Mustang Cat. The last section of the video includes advisories concerning the use of information in this video.
I'm James Holt with the Texas Engineering Extension Service. We're going to talk about the pre-start or walk-around inspection of the motor grader. First off, what I always like to check the very first thing when I'm doing one of these is my grab irons and my steps, my points of entry. We've found that most injuries occur to operators when they're getting on and getting off the equipment. So we want to make sure these are safe and secure when you're doing that. We'll use it not only to get in the cab, but also to check other parts of our equipment during our inspection process. I always like to get on the machine and find the operator's manual. This should always be kept on the machine, not in the boss's desk somewhere or off out in the shop. It has information that the operators need to be able to find out different things on the equipment and safety aspects of operating and inspecting the equipment. So make sure it's always on your machine. The next thing I always do, if my machine is equipped with a master switch, I'll turn the master switch off. If it is not, I'll remove the ignition key and I'll place a do not operate tag on the equipment. You do this for two reasons. First off, and more importantly, it's going to keep you safe. Because if you're underneath it or you're in the motor compartment inspecting it and somebody else comes up, and everybody has a key to these things. They come up, they stick a key in it, they don't know you're around it, they start it, now they put you in danger. With the key out and the master switch off and a do not operate tag on there, that eliminates that problem. You'll do that especially if you're going to be underneath the equipment for any reason whatsoever, where you're totally out of sight of anybody around the equipment. Always put those tags in place. Make them very visible. If you need to put two on the machine, put two on there to where it's always very visible to anybody walking up. The next thing we're going to look at is tire pressure. Make sure you check your tire pressure. We do have tire gauges that are designed for this. They're a little bit bigger than what we carry in our regular automobiles, so make sure you have the appropriate tire gauge. You'll check the tire pressure, and the way we find out what tire pressure we need to have in it, we follow the manufacturer's recommendations. Not only from your equipment manufacturer, but also the tire manufacturer will have their own recommendations. An underinflated tire is a serious problem. If you underinflate it, you will start getting the overflexing of the sidewalls. This overflexing when you're roading this machine can create extreme heat and possible tire failure while you're rolling down the highway. Now, we also don't want to overinflate them, because an overinflated tire creates a whole nother scenario of problems we have to deal with. First off, it affects our stability of the machine, because now the machine has more of a tendency to want to hard bounce with us. We lose our steerability, we lose braking, we lose control of the machine. When you're working the machine in the roadways, an overinflated tire will not let the machine absorb the energy that's created by rough spots in the road. That energy is thus transferred through the machine down into our blade and causes chop to our blade, which creates rub boards in our roads. And that's another problem we have to deal with later on. But we don't want to do that. We want to run the correct tire pressure at all times. That evens out our ride. It keeps the machine stable at all points. It makes our job easier. It makes everything go so much smoother for us. We want to check our glass and our mirrors to make sure we can see out of them. If we're running around with dirty windows and dirty side doors we can't see out of, we're causing more harm to the public. What about the other workers around the job site? You can't see them. You know, you need to have that visibility. You need to have your mirrors properly adjusted before you get to work. Make sure they're set right. If they're not, take time. This is not the time to say, I don't do windows. You know, get your rag out, get your cleaning fluids out, clean the windows, clean your mirrors where you have good visibility on these machines at all times. Now, we also want to inspect all the components of the machine to make sure we don't have any leaks, fuel leaks, oil leaks, any type of hydraulic leak or anything like that. We want to make sure that those are inspected every day, and a lot of times even during the day if we're running in heavy operations. The reason for that is if you don't inspect it and a leak occurs, now we've got hydraulic fluid, we got diesel fuel onto our roadways. That causes damage to our roadways. It also causes damage to our environment. And if these fluids are on a hard surface and they get in runoff, they run into our waterways or our drainage system, we've really impacted our environment to a point we don't want to. We also need to inspect our air cleaners and our air intake and our exhaust system. This is a component of the machine that helps the machine do its job properly, but we're having to comply with the Clean Air Act now. And if any part of that component, the air intake or the exhaust, is broken down, we're letting fumes, exhaust fumes, emit around areas that aren't protected now, and we're doing more damage to our environments. So we always want to make sure we check that out appropriately, each and every time. At any time you're going to be roading this machine, we want to make sure there's other safety things involved in it. Not only you're in your seat, you're wearing your seat belt, you've got flashers on, you've got your slow moving vehicle sign on the back of your equipment, or you're running with an escort. Check with your appropriate area to find out what is required for you to do once you get out into the field. Now, an area that has been of some concern to us in the past that we always want to make sure we check when we're doing our walk-around inspections is the way we're carrying our moldboard setup. We want to inspect all of our hardware up in here to make sure it is safe to get out on the road with, because you're going to pull this moldboard up high, you're going to tuck it in underneath the machine while you're roading. If you have any problem with any of these attachment points, it's not going to stay there. So when you're doing your inspection, make sure all of your attachment points, especially going down to your moldboard area, is good and clean and is operating properly on that. Now that brings us to another point when we're out into the roadways. Of course, when you're working on the roadway, you always want to make sure you're wearing your safety vest. On your safety vest, you always want to make sure that the manufacturer's tag is in there, and it has this information on it. ANSI ISEA 107 2004. As of 2009, it was mandatory if you're working on a federal aid highway that you wear your reflective vest. This is a Class 3 vest. This allows us more visibility. This is our first line of defense from the general public. Also, from your perspective as an operator, if all your workers are wearing them, that gives you better visibility of those workers on that ground also. And operators say, well, I'm up in the cab, I don't have to wear this. Well, are you always going to be in the cab all day long? Probably not. So the minute you step out of the cab, you need to have your defense on. And this is our first line of defense. If you're working on a federal aid highway, it is now mandatory that we do wear these. So check with your supervisor, make sure that you're following correct procedures on wearing your reflective vest when you're out on your job sites. If you'll perform all these inspections every day, step by step, you'll be a more productive worker, you'll be a safer worker, you'll be able to stay in your machine more because you're not broke down so often. So make sure we do our walk-around inspections, and we do them each and every day. Thank you.
My name is Russell Sharp. I work at the motor grader factory for Volvo Construction Equipment. We're going to do a little walk around today, operator's daily startup inspection. Now there's a few things that TX want to teach you here today. One of them, of course, is safety. The other is maintaining your equipment and doing your job properly. So now some of you fellas probably think, well, I wear a ball cap and I drive an old half-ton truck. But yet, I'm no fool. I'm a professional. And you're going to have to get that point across to the traveling public out there and to your councils and to your commissioners. You are a professional operator. They talk about policemen and firemen being heroes and saving lives, and I say to you, what about you fellas? Each one of you are heroes. You save lives every day, 7 days a week. And you do that by taking care of yourself, by taking care of your equipment, by shaping those roadways so that the traveling public can have a comfortable and safe ride down that road. And you do that every day. That's your job. Now this walk around, of course, is generic to all graders. Doesn't matter who manufactures them. And I'm an old guy, and I learned back in the old days that the first place you go to is the engine. Now on this walk around, it does not matter really where you start and end your inspection. The point is to do that inspection every day. And you do a bit of an inspection at the end of the day. Cover the important parts such as engine and leakings at the end of the day. So I'm going to begin here at the door, because this is where I usually start my day and where I'll end my day. And I'll begin by putting my gear into the cab. All right? Don't leave this door swinging open. You can hit your head on it. Either latch it back or close the doors. Don't leave grader doors swinging in the breeze, please. Now, while I'm here, and I know I'm going to get in this grader eventually, I'm going to check out the step here. As Ernest will talk about later, this is where most of the accidents happen, and I'll let him talk about that. But you want to check your entry steps. You don't want them falling apart as you're getting in the grader. So I'll check this out now. On this particular manufacturer, the transmission is here and there's a sight glass to check the fluids in it. So I'll check the fluids here. Now while I'm in this machine, I'm going to go into this articulation hinge area. This is an area where you get a lot of debris, sticks and stones caught in there from the day, whatever type of work you're doing. Now I usually carry a stick and I'll keep it on the grader somewhere. Use that to reach in here and knock the stones out. You don't want a stone falling out on a traveled asphalt surface for some car to pick it up with their tire, whack into another car, and in the worst scenario, smash the windscreen and that car goes off the road. So you want to take care of the traveling public. Clean it off in the articulation area. While I'm here, I'm going to check for fluid leakage around the brake housing. Check the inside of the tires for cuts and scrapes. Check the radial side of the tires. Here you're going to be checking for nails, screws and whatnot, and cuts in the tires. And you're going to check the outer side wall of the tire. Now, Having cuts in the radial portion of the tire isn't so critical as having cuts and slashes in the outside portion of the tire. If you have deep cuts in here, you're going to have to look at it and consider replacing that tire. Next, I'm going to move to these bolts here, the mounting bolts for the tire. Mounting bolts can only be checked with a torque wrench, proper torque. And we don't carry the torque wrench around with us, do we? So what you're going to look for here is rust bleed. If you have rust bleed, more than likely that bolt is loose. That's when you're going to want to go and get the torque wrench and check it out. As you've seen in the video about the tire pressures can only truly be checked with a tire pressure gauge. Okay, and tire pressures are important to the performance of the machine. And perhaps Marv will talk a little later about tires and tire pressures. You want to check the outside condition of the rim. This is a one-piece rim. It's very easy to see damage to this rim. A little more difficult on a three-piece rim. Those you'd have to pay a little more attention to notice damage to the rim. This particular manufacturer has a sight glass to check the tandem chain case oil level. Other manufacturers may not have it, but there is a place to check it on their machines as well. So I checked this here. Next, what I come to is my battery box. Open up the case. What you're going to do here is you're going to physically grab these components, these batteries, and you're going to check to see that they are secure in there. As you know, graders do a lot of bouncing and shaking during the day. The same with the cables. Physically grab on them and see that they're tightened down. When you open up an access panel or an access door, close it as you leave it. That way you won't make any mistakes. Now I'm at the engine compartment. Open up the door. In this engine area, of course, you've got your oil level check for the engine. That's the most important thing you're coming here for. But now that you're here, look at your muffler mounts. Here and on the front part of the grader, you want to look for shiny metal. Anything that happens to be shiny is probably going to fail. There's a crack or something's rubbing or chafing, and it'll eventually fail. So take a good look in here for shiny metal. Another thing you're going to want to look for is the exhaust leakage, some black soot. Physically grab the components and make sure everything's tight in here. Take a good look around, look on the inside for oil, leakage. Everything is fine in here. I see my coolant level up there. I've already looked in the manual. I know the proper level, so I can look at it and see that it's fine. I see some decals here. These warning decals or decals that are on the machine, every one of them has an explanation to them. Okay, these are not language barriered. They are symbols, and they're explained in the operator's manual, what each one of them mean. And they're placed all around the machine, pinch points, hot surfaces, whatnot. Read the operator's manual. Now I'm going to step back from the machine, and I'm going to scan up the back of this side of the cab. I'm looking at the condition of the glass, I'm looking at the condition of the lighting, and I'm looking at my wipers. If glass is dirty, and especially on the rear window, in low sunlight, if you've got a dust film on there, sometimes it can be just like a sunshade. It'll blind you and you can't see anything out of the rear. Next, I'll move my eyes along the outflow of the grader to the rear. I'm going to look at my air intake and my exhaust pipe. If something doesn't look right there, come around and physically go up on the machine and grab those components and give them a good shake. You don't want stuff falling off of the grader. And we're going to talk about three-point mount dismount, and it's the same thing when you're getting up onto the grader. Three-point mount and dismount. You've got footrest and you've got handles. Doesn't matter where you go, in the cab or anywhere else on the grader, 3-point mount, 3-point contact. When I come to the back of the tandem case here, of course, I'm going to do the same thing with the tire, as I already explained on the front, and I'm going to look for debris and knock it off the tandem chain case. Look at this brake housing for fluid leakage. Come around to the rear. What I'm going to look at here is lighting condition and your slow-moving vehicle sign. Red fades quicker than any other color. If these signs are faded, they're ineffective. Replace them, they're not expensive. Look at the lighting condition. On this grader, you can open up the hood here and you can check out the condition of the cooling cores, and that's more likely leakage and debris on the cooling cores. Okay? Over here I've got ground fueling with the fuel cap. Check to make sure that the cap is tight. You don't want the cap coming off and fuel spilling all over the ground. Close and latch things as you've used them. Next, take a look underneath the grader. Here you're looking for signs of fluid leakage. Hopefully the night before you've placed it on level, dry ground. And that way you can detect anything that's leaked off overnight. If you see something, of course, you're going to have to investigate where it came from. If you're using your ripper or any other attachments, check the condition of the teeth. Check the condition of the shanks. Make sure all the mounting hardware is on there correctly. And here's a tip for you fellas that have attachments on your graders. This is something for you to get used to. The beginning of the shift, when you start to move the grader, lift your attachments first, your moldboard next. At the end of the day, put your attachments down first, your moldboard next. If you get into that habit, you won't find yourself running quarter mile down the road with the ripper dragging into the ground. Oh, it's happened? Okay, so it's just a good habit. Lift your attachments first, then lower them first. You move around to this side of the grader. Now, my eyes are going to follow back up the outline of the grader to the back of the cab on this side. Again, you're just checking the lighting, perhaps looking at the wiring mounts if you can see them. You do the same procedure as you did on the left-hand side of checking the tires, cleaning debris. In your toolbox, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, you may be required to carry spill kits with you or fire extinguishers. You should check them out. Some of those items are dated and you have to replace or recharge things certain dates. So you can check that out in your toolbox. Open up this engine area. On this grader, here's the turbocharger. Very important area of the engine. Here you're especially going to want to look for exhaust leakage. Okay, the alternator's over here. Physically reach in and grab the alternator, grab the belts, grab your turbocharger, just pull on anything, make sure the starter wires are on there correctly, and just generally look through the area, peer in there. You're looking for fluid leakage. Everything looks good in here now. Close your access door. And now I'll move to the front of the tandem chain case. Here's this side of the articulation hinge. Again, debris, fluid leakage at the brake housing, tire condition, mounting hardware. On this particular manufacturer, here's my brake reservoir. I've already read the manual. I know where the proper level is. I can glance at it. If it's covered in dust, of course, have a rag with you to clean it off so you can see the proper level. Now I'll step back and I'm going to look up this side of the cab. Again, glass condition and, importantly, mirror condition. Then I'll come down to the steps. Grab onto your steps, make sure they're secure. Move to the front of the grader, Scan up this side of the cab. Wipers, lighting, glass condition again. Now I'll begin to follow the outline of the grader from the arch down to the front. The arch area and where the blade lift cylinders are most prone to cracking on graders. And the reason being is the grader is nothing more than a lever, a 2x4 with a brick. That's a grader. Let's take the brick away, let's put in a blade. Now let's throw an engine and a couple of wheels on the back. Now let's go. What do you think's going to happen? A blade in the ground, an engine on the back, starts to squeeze, and up comes your frame. That's why this area is more prone to cracking. So pay attention to cracks in this area. Now we can come down to the moldboard circle drawbar area. You want to look at all your ball mounts. If any of them are loose, these are shimmable. Get a hold of the mechanic. Come down to the back of the moldboard, and here you're going to want to look at the back of your cutting edge and the mounting hardware for the cutting edges. Cutting edges provide strength to the moldboard. If the cutting edge gets down to about 1/2 inch in the bottom of the board, it's time to change them. They've lost the strength that they provide. Plus, you probably won't get through your workday. So if you think that you won't get through your workday, change the edges before you go out. We've got bearing material for the blade slide, and we've got bearing material in the circle area. Check out the bearing material. The way to check the bearing material for blade slide is to put the blade on the ground and physically move it up and down a bit. If you detect that there's too much play in it, come out, take a second good look at the bearing material. Perhaps they need to be changed. I've seen many moldboards ruined from not changing bearing materials. Come around here. Now, over in this area here, we're going to check out your hoses. Again, you're going to have to grab onto them to see if any are loose. You're going to have to look at the fitting area to see if you've got any leakage, and you're going to have to use your eyes to see if there's any kind of chafing going on. Okay, you don't want to get halfway through the work shift and have blown a hose. Now I'm going to bend down, I'm going to look underneath the circle area for debris, more than likely sticks and mud. If you have working in a clay area and you leave the mud caked in under there, it's going to wear out the bearing material a lot quicker. So get a stick, reach in there and poke off any of the mud that might be jammed up in between the teeth. This manufacturer has teeth on the outside, other ones may have them on the inside. Either way, clean the material away from it. Now while I'm down here, what I'm not going to do is cross under this drawbar. For safety's sake, whether the machine is running or not, you should never cross under the drawbar. Okay? If you keep that in mind, it'll help you in the long run. I personally know a grader operator who was killed doing that. 6 months from retirement, city employee. For some reason, he went under the grader, and for some reason that they hadn't determined yet, the machine went into gear and killed him. It happens. Check out the front frame for cracking again. Move up to your ball stud, take a look at it. If you see a lot of shininess, or if you've been getting some clunking while you've been grading, you might want to check this out. Proper way is to have a mechanic put on a magnetic gauge and check the clearance here. But a quick check for you would be simply to put the moldboard on the ground, roll the pitch back and forth a little bit, and have someone look here to see how much play is in there. They are shimmable on all graders. Okay, if you think you have too much play in there, get a hold of the mechanic. He'll put on a gauge here and check the tolerances. This area is important because this is what gives the grader the ability to achieve an infinite number of angles. Now we come to the front axle. most graders these days are getting a lot better for the maintenance items, so there's few things to look for here. But again, it's going to be shiny metal. It's going to be hose condition. Your tires, again, inside, outside. Come around to the front. Check out the areas. Wherever you see a grease fitting, it's a wear area. Those are the ones you want to pay attention to for shiny metal. Debris, again, if you have debris on there, knock it off. Now that I'm at the front of the grader, I'm going to look up the frame to the whole front of the grader. Again, glass condition and lighting, mirrors, hoses, blade area, everything looks good here. Debris is gone from the push block. No debris here on the front of the axle. No collapsed components. Hose condition looks good. Tires, sidewalls, good condition. Radial area of the tire, great, no chunks out of it. Mounting hardware, tire pressures. And we're just going to basically come along here, checking for cracks, debris, look underneath once again on this side. Now that I'm down here, I may as well look at my cutting edge condition. As you have previously seen, if you have hollowed out cutting edges, they're not very good, and you as operators should be trying to maintain a straight edge, and it is possible. If you pay attention to it, it is possible to maintain straight edges. If you're doing finishing work, you cannot make grade with hollowed out edges. Again, ball studs, hoses, and cracking here in the arch area. Now here I am back at the grader. What I would do now, open up the door, latch it back. Get in the grader. That gear that I've put in the machine, I'm going to want to stow it so that nothing's going to come out and bounce around. You don't want a pop can flying off, wedging underneath the pedals. I can personally speak to how surprising it is when you find out you can't stop and you don't know why when you step on the brakes. It's because a pop can's gone under the pedal. Once I've got the gear stowed, I'm going to look around and make sure nobody's around the grader. I probably want to yell clear, and I'll turn the key on. The first thing I'm going to do is scan all the gauges. All the warning devices come up and are activated. That tells you that they're functioning. Then I'm going to look at my fuel level. Fuel level can be considered a safety item as well. Imagine you're in downtown College Station, you run out of fuel halfway across a busy intersection at 4 in the afternoon. What's that going to create for traffic? Havoc. It's a safety item. Once I've seen all those gauges functioning, I'm going to start up the engine. After I start up the engine, again I scan the gauges to make sure all the oil pressures and the critical functions come up and are showing. Then I'm going to turn on all of my electrical equipment, everything in there, the heaters, the wipers, and the lights. I'm going to test the horn. Then I get out of the grader and I make another quick walk around. And here's what I'm going to do. When I'm here, I'm going to walk around, I'm going to look under the transmission area for leakage. I'm going to walk to the rear. Again, I'm going to look underneath the engine area for leakage now that the engine is running. And I'll continue walking around, checking all the lights. Rotating beacon, flashers, wipers. Go to the front, check all that out. Then I'm going to come around, I'm going to get back into the grader. What I'm going to do now is turn off all the electrical equipment that I won't be needing right now. Then I'm going to check out to see that the operator's manual is present in the grader. Check again to make sure nobody's around. Now I'm going to do a brake check. I'll put the machine in forward, in low gear, and I'll creep slowly forward, and I'll apply the brakes to make sure they're working. Then I'm going to put it in reverse. Look behind you, Back up slowly, listen for the backup alarm to see that it's functioning. Step on the brakes, see that the brakes are functioning again. In order to check to see if your signal lights and brake lights are working, you should have a helper. If you don't have a helper, try and back it up close to a building where you'll get the reflection. Okay? Once I've done my brake testing, then I'm going to slowly creep forward and check the steering function. Make sure all the steering components are working well. I'm almost ready to start the day, but before I do that, and even though the weather might be nice outside, you want to cycle your hydraulics. Go through the cycle once, just to warm up the oil. Now that I've done that, I'm almost ready to go. What's the last thing I need to do? Put on my safety seat belt. Safety seat belts these days, almost all manufacturers have a 3-inch wide belt, and they're very comfortable. And they're very easy to get used to wearing, the same as your safety vests. Very easy to get used to wearing them. Okay, so I've covered most of those items that are generic to all graders, how you should inspect your machine daily. At the end of the shift, I'll lower my attachments first. I'll lower my moldboard, and while the machine's running, I might want to take a quick walk around once more, just looking for signs of fluid leakage, putting it in its service position, and shut the machine down.
My name is Ernest Galindo, and I'm with the Texas Association of Counties. Now, if you look around, this is a true representation of county employees. We have a lot of experience around this group. The fact is, some of you and some of us, we're no longer spring chicks. And it's a lot easier for us to get injured. When we talk about a piece of equipment, regardless whether we're talking about a maintainer, front end loader, mowing tractor, grade all, it doesn't matter. The type of injury that we normally see among operators is what? Anybody? Anybody?
Death.
Death? Well, some of them, they do end up in death. But the prevailing type of injury coming from a piece of equipment like this, slip and falls. Now, Russell indicated the 3-point contact, which is 2 hands and 1 foot, or 2 feet and 1 hand. And that's how we go in, and that's how we get out. The fact is, this happens too often where the operator jumps from the top of the machine to the ground. Not only are we jumping, but we're jumping onto an uneven surface. And that's how we see how you injure your ankles, your knees, your hips, your lower backs. And right now, a prevailing type of injury among operators is rotator cuffs. Rotator cuffs, if you don't have a good handle getting in and out of the piece of equipment, and if you slip, guess what's going to happen? You're going to try to regain your balance with one arm, and all 150 pounds of you are going to be directed to the shoulder, and you're going to tear up your shoulder. As an average, it's taken us about 6 months for you guys to come back to work. But one thing I want to emphasize, whether you hurt your lower back, your ankle, your knee, your rotator cuff for sure, your body's never going to be the same. So you have to be extremely careful when you get in and out of the piece of equipment, because those are the injuries that we see on a regular basis. Now, another practice that we see out there is trying to use the blade to get into the piece of machine. Now, the fact is, you're working on surfaces that sometimes you may be dealing with wet surfaces, sometimes you may be dealing on muddy conditions, snow, you name it. If you're not careful getting in and out, you're gonna land right on top of that blade. And that's how you're gonna wind up with a very severe lower back injury. So we have to be extremely careful when we get in and out of the piece of equipment. One more thing I wanna point out to you is working around this area, never get or avoid getting in between the tandems when the machine is running. You never know if the machine is going to kick it into gear, and you may not have a chance to get out of there on time. This machine has a lot of blind spots. If you're standing over here, if you're a spotter on the ground, if you're a flagger, if you're a road hand, if you're standing over here, your operator is not going to be able to see you. So you have to be extremely careful when you bring new personnel to the work site, when you have part-timers, when you have volunteers, when you have trustees working for the county, they need to understand that just because you're sitting way up high, you may not be able to see them. So keep that in mind. When you bring new personnel to the work site, make that part of the orientation before you allow them to go into your work zone. You're in control. Thank you.
Fellows, my name's Marvin Epperly. I'm an operator out of the Coal Valley demonstration area and Sacaton, Arizona demonstration area for John Deere, one of 6 product applications consultants. And I'm humbled and I feel privileged to be here in the midst of all this wisdom. I see a lot of years, a few whiskers, and a lot of wisdom mixed in with this crowd, and that I could be allowed to share with you somewhat the manufacturer's point of view about safety of horse and the service, a pre-trip inspection, things like that. Being number 2 in line here, I just want to reiterate just everything that Russell had said about the approach of the machine, the side that the service points are on the machine and that. Before I get started with that, I got one more little thing I want to share with you, is how we approach the job, how we come to the job, with what state of mind we start out with in the morning. A lot of times preoccupation, your mind's adrift a little bit, your head's not in the game with whatever domestic issues, whatever life deals you, financial, times being what they are, and that it's easy for one's mind to wander off of what truly is going to matter to you as you come on that job site every day. And the reason I say that, if your head isn't in the game, these machines are not to be taken lightly. They can either be a tool to help you to get your task during the day, or they're big enough, they're powerful enough, they got enough weight in them and everything to become a weapon. I mean, a lot of times people talk about the kind of accidents that happen. A lot of times safety aspect of it is just maybe falling off the machine when trying to do daily inspections and getting up on the machine, cleaning windows, or fueling the machine and things like that, that even though that the deck or the step areas on this machine might only be 4 feet off the ground, that's a long ways to fall, especially if your head would impact something like that. But if you imagine approaching your job first thing in the morning, disgusted at whatever, or a little despondent, and that, it's not a very safe thing to do. And if you could just take a minute or two and breathe if you must, and try to get yourself collected, get ready. It's kind of like bulldogging steers a little bit. If you can't get the horse to collect a little bit, he's going to break the barrier, and you're not going to catch your steer very well. And same thing with this. If one's mind isn't in the game, and we're not focused or whatever, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to take shortcuts a lot of times. And you say, well, I run this grader every day, and maybe I don't need to look at a lot of the different points on this grader, service points every day, because, well, I just visited that. I just greased that, and I looked over the machine 2 or 3 days ago or whatever. But as you put a lot of time, hours on the machines, the kind of work, the kind of grueling work you put the machine through or whatever can have damaging and wearing effects on the machine. So anyway, as we approach the grader from that side, I've got this blade up in what we call a maintenance position and a blade change position, which would inhibit my ability to get in behind this blade to enter the cab from this side. But just for the sake of service, I wanted to put it in this position. Now, this blade is up in a position where there's energy stored. We don't have a release of free energy state on this moldboard right now when it's like this. Although there are lockouts built into the blade lift circuits that should keep it from falling away, falling on the ground, or pinching you or whatever. It'd always be advised, and whatever your policies will be from your garages or whatever, that you'd want to put some stands under this. Now, the reason I propose to you a maintenance position like this as we get a little older, or maybe if you're younger and you got an athletic injury or anything like that, these cutting edges, weigh in excess of 100 pounds apiece. And if you're underneath the machine trying to manhandle them and that, you're going to have lower back issues and shoulder and elbow issues and things like that. But if we put it in a position like this, with all safety constraints put in, stands or whatever, so that it's safe to do so, and remembering always not to get between the machine and the moldboard like that, we can address this hardware with our wrenches and everything, and the cutting edges will stay in the frog of that moldboard. They sit up there just like they're on a workbench. And when you slide this moldboard out a little bit and get it after you got through the door or whatever, you can get that moldboard far enough out here that you'll be able to slide them on and off the tailgate of a pickup. You can be the right height for service, things like that. Work with your hardware, clean the area real well to put those cutting edges on and things like that. So, and I'm going to reiterate a lot of the service points on this grader later on as we go through the walk around and that, but while we're in this position, as well as talking about cutting edge wear points, replacements and things like that, we can also look at the condition of our circle shoes, the ring and pinion for the circle rotation and everything. We have wear inserts here that can be looked at, and we can judge by the specifications given in the operator's manual about how much clearance we'd have here in our wear, in our shoe, replaceable shoes, wear inserts, and be able to judge accordingly and be able to replace accordingly. Now, with this machine being banked out here in the left position, it's going to allow us free state of energy to be able to, with no weight on the lower three shoes down here in the bottom. So we could put this blade clear up in vertical position. We'd be able to make those replacements as necessary. We don't have to loosen the hardware in the circle shoes. All we have to do is address the 3/8 hardware that holds the plates and holds those wear inserts in place like that. We would be replacing just the 3 on the lower side, being the weight is off of those shoes on that side, and then we'd be able to rotate over to the other side and replace those inserts as well. Again, just reiterating that if when we do that, we're not having a manhandle and handling weight and things standing on our head or whatever, trying to replace or adjust this circle and side shift wear inserts and things like that. So with that, again, starting out, if this blade were up underneath the machine, we'd be approaching this side of the grader and putting our safety gear in the cab, as Russell had mentioned, things like that. As we approach this grader, we can start looking for hardware degradation, things that are getting ready to fail, things that don't look right to us as our eyes sweep over the machine. Is there a hose out of place? Is there a leaky point on the machine? Are we seeing any cracks in the frames, missing lights or mirrors, broken glass? Perhaps even if there had been vandalism from that prior night or whatever, you'd be able to approach the machine and determine something doesn't look right and would warrant some investigation on that to look at that. Loose or missing hardware, tire and wheel hardware, the condition that the tires are in, or inflation on the tires. And I want to talk a little bit more about that later too, about how it has effects of having proper inflation to stabilize that motor grader as you're blading and everything else. But we would want to look before we even approach the engine oil check, transmission oil check, hydraulic oil check and things like that. We'd want to maybe suggest to you that you look for these conditions to occur. A complete walk around the machine to check for those things. Again, lights, pre-cleaner, muffler, looseness, missing hardware, things like that. How would we determine if we're having some frame crack issues on a machine? What kind of evidence would it give me that there's possibly a problem getting ready to happen on a mainframe on a grader? Any of you guys got an idea? We'd start to see a crack and a little bit of rust coming from in behind the paint. We might even see a little bit of clearance between the two welded pieces or whatever. And what about hardware that's loosening? What would I look for there? Wheel hardware, frame hardware, attachment points for our tools. Yep, there might be rust coming out from behind washers or heads, bolts, things like that. And then just the physically being able to see a gap between a head and a mounting point in those holes and things like that. So as we're going along, and one of the bones of contention is on motor graders too, and other equipment, is that they come with operator's manuals. They're supposed to be in the cab, in the compartment they're designed for, but a lot of times when the machine's new, the mechanics, the shop guys or whatever, take them out and they put them in a cabinet somewhere, and you don't have that along. But all graders have a legend, if you will, a periodic service chart, pretty close to where your daily checks are. And if we look inside that main service area in a motor grader, we're going to see a periodic service chart here, in this case on the John Deere, on the engine oil check side of the engine compartment. Everybody can look there. So if I ever have any questions about where in the scheme of things, where on this motor grader there's a service point that I need to know what it is, what kind of lubricants it uses, whether it be oil or grease, and where in that map of that machine, where is that located, that particular service point. And I can look on this machine's legend, this periodic service chart, and be able to locate that, and it'll point it out to me. And then I can go right over to the chart and look at the hours intervals of service suggested and see at what time is appropriate to go ahead and give that service on that particular point. So if the operator's manual is missing, we're always going to have that to give us reference to where on this grader and what time and what kind of lubes we're going to need to give that kind of service to. So again, engine oil check, transmission oil check and fills, both those fills here. We have electrical service shut-off master switch on that same side. It's a good vandal proofing to be able to shut the power off to this machine and close and lock the side shields when you leave at night and everything else, and they're not going to be able to get any power to start the machine with without that being reconnected. On the same side of the machine, and while we're looking in there, and we've checked in engine transmission oils, things like that, we can look at conditions of hoses, clamps, hose routings, cables, anything chafing, anything getting ready to fail or anything like that. We run our eyes across that, look at belts, and see if we got a flapper or one that's cracking or whatever, anything that's getting ready to fail there. Looseness, shivs, if there's looseness in a belt or anything like that, we're probably going to have to attend to that rather than take off. Hydraulic oil check is this reservoir right above the pumps next to the radiator. While we're looking at that and assure ourselves that we have proper amount of oil in the reservoir in reserve, we can look at the condition of the coolers, the radiators and everything else, and see how much trash might be starting to build up on that could cause us problems later on a hot day or anything like that. Trash that also that can ignite. I mean, these motor graders generate a lot of heat in and around their engine and stuff, up around the turbochargers and things. You have the fine grasses and leaves and things that start to accumulate. These engines are higher up in the emission standards now, federal government emission standards, and they require a lot more heat in order to do a cleaner burn on the fuel and exhaust and things like that. So we're looking at higher temperatures around in the engine compartment, and you want to bear a lot of consideration about the cleanliness of that area so that you don't have anything that would ignite and cause a fire or whatever. You kind of think more in terms of forestry equipment or dozers or anything like that that's clearing and working in there that accumulates a lot of that. But when you're working shoulders and there's grass and stuff and it's swirling around, it's going to pick some of that up from the bottom of the engine. The fan's going to try and drive that into the coolers and around the belly pans and nest in around the electricals and everything else on the grader. When we've completed the walk around, we've checked our lights, make sure they all work, flashers, safety emblems, hardware, frame integrity, tire pressures, tire wheel hardware, and of course ground engaging parts like our cutting edges, ripper teeth, things like that, and it can assure ourselves that this machine is safe and ready to start our day with and things like that. Then a lot of times it requires a warm-up. The machine might need to be started and warmed up when it's safe to do so, making sure everybody's out of areas like again, I use this as an example. With this blade being in the bank position, in a service position like this, it's a pretty good opportunity to get pinched here. If you would get up there and start that machine and maybe crawl on here and decide you're going to grease the machine or whatever and get in between places like this. And it's an opportunity if somebody crawled up on the machine and was thinking they're going to help you and could hit the articulation lever, or could hit a blade lift or whatever and pull that into you and squeeze and things. So you got to make sure, you got to be thinking all the time about where your implements, where your tools are, and who's around while that engine's warming up and things like that. It's always best advised, if you're going to be milling around your machine and that, it's better to do it before you start the machine, is what we kind of suggest to you. Again, all these motor graders articulate. They have the secondary steering capability to frame steer, and when they do so, and when they're running and that, these clearances between the cab and the front of the tandems and things like that really close right up. There's just not enough room in there for a person to fit in between there, and you can have problems right away. Safety warning, labels, things like that. You'll see a lot of tags on the machine suggesting lift points, chain points, things like that. Try to save them if you can. There's a lot of rotation, and new hires come in and everything else. They might be taking over your grader and things like that. And without the guidance of some of these decals and points, they aren't going to know what they're for, and maybe they need that to help them. Maybe if it's going to be transported, put on a semi, whatever, they need all those decals left in place if you would, so that they'd always be able to have those for references at a glance. As I've finished my walk around, I've looked again, like Russell mentioned and suggested to you, we want to look for leaks and things like that, pools of oil under the engine compartment, under the working tools, under the front end and things like that. Now is the time to correct that. And of course checking for oil levels as well as soon as we're done with it and have corrected or remedied any of those kind of problems. These fittings and hoses on most of these motor graders anymore are what we call a flat-faced O-ring faced seal type hose. We don't use the 37-degree flare fittings anymore on very many places anymore, and where I'm going with that is a fitting that is finger tight, really nicely finger tight, will seal at the system pressures and circuit pressures hydraulically on these machines, and as they loosen a little bit, get warm, get cold, vibration, hoses wiggling, things like that, they'll start developing small little leaks in that. And where I'm going with that is that if you look for an evidence of just a little weepage, maybe ever so subtle, just a little bit, and there may be a little dust collected from the day before you run the machine, you probably shouldn't be seeing that. You shouldn't be seeing that grouted in and dusted in around that, and a dirty fitting like that. If you do, you might want to take it under advisement that it could be starting to get loose and getting ready to blitz. Now, that O-ring will hold pressure up to the point until you get flow, and once you get a pretty good stream of oil in that, what it does is that oil under pressure will cut that O-ring. It'll actually erode that. Some people say it blitzes them. It'll blow them out or whatever. They will not tighten up and reseal. A lot of guys will try to put a wrench on them and hope that they'll reseal, and they won't. It's going to require releasing the energy, shutting the machine down, releasing the energy, the hydraulic pressure on that circuit, and replacing that O-ring in that before it'll ever tighten up. Okay? Any questions so far? And again, I can't reiterate enough that if you do some of these practices that are going to save you physically, just like this blade being put up in bank position and blade change service position like that you may want to put some safety stands underneath them, and that in case a hose would fail or a cylinder packing or anything like that would allow that blade to drift, and you'd happen to be in behind there and it wouldn't be a good thing. What could be good to save you physically and back and everything else could also be the thing that could cause a serious injury or death by being pinched in behind. And now on greasing on the machine, you guys have probably set up your own policies on greasing a machine and that. I'm from the north, I'm from Moline, Illinois, and it's cool at night or cool during the winter or whatever. We kind of have a rule of thumb that when the machine's been ran for a day or whatever, and it's been exercised, all the joints, all the pins, ball joints, trunnion caps, balls, lift cylinder ends and everything, when they've been exercised and worked, they're typically going to be warmer and have a better chance of accepting grease at the end of a day. Now, I don't know, if it matters that much here when it doesn't get down near to zero or whatever, but it's going to matter when it gets down to freezing and you'll actually get a better result in greasing at night when all those parts have been exercised and a little bit warmer. It'll accept grease and bathe completely all the way around that surface and give you a better result, and a lot of times just a shot or two will help you. There still are service points on these motor graders. Every ball joint on the circle side shift, blade lift cylinders, the trunnion point for the draft frame mounting point in the front, nothing in the circle anymore. These have replacement wear shoes in here that we suggest to you keep them dry because they're self-lubricating, and if you put any kind of a lubricant on there, then it becomes an attractant that grinds down to like a valve grinding compound and actually accelerates the wear on these shoes, and it doesn't improve circle torque. A lot of guys think that it will. A lot of guys are trying to swing material around, circling on the go and things like that, and they want to improve circle torque and that. You just simply have got to release the load enough to let it physically be able to do that, and don't try to rely on lubricants on these surfaces because it just accelerates the wear on those shoes, things like that. We try to make it as easy as we can for you about grease points on these machines, in that they're at ground level, so we're not stooping over very far, and the highest we'll have to reach when this is in its normal position would be the blade lift anchor points that are still going to be able to be reached from the ground. So we've got safety in mind, trying to keep you from crawling all over the machine, and you're not hands-free when you do that. You're carrying a grease gun and a grease rag and you're crawling up on a machine, that's not a good thing. So everything's meant to be ground level.
All right, you've heard from Russell. He talked about walk-arounds and safety. Marv talked about walk-arounds and safety. Ernesto talked about walk-arounds and safety. So what do you think I'm going to talk about? Walk-arounds and safety, right. Now, why do we do a walk-around? There's two reasons, right? Yesterday I was told there's actually three reasons. Anybody know what the number one reason is? Safety. What's the number two reason? Safety. What's the number three reason? Well, safety also, but my experience has been that all these machines break when they're in the barn overnight. Whatever gets broke, the lights, the windows, the mirror, happens after you parked it in the barn, or after somebody else parked it in the barn, right? Nobody knows how it happened, it just happened. So the other reason for safety is you want to know when that mirror gets broke, you want to know when the cutting edge gets broke, you want to know if you got a flat tire. And you also want to report that to your supervisor. That way you got a record of it, it's documented in case something does happen. But like Russell said and Marv said, and I'm going to tell you the same thing, when you do a walk-around inspection, it really doesn't make any difference where you start as long as you get used to starting at one point and doing the procedure, same thing every time. Get in the habit of looking at it. Now, right here we've got a good level flat spot, so I can start my walk-around inspection as I approach this machine. I can look down on the ground and look for any oil leaks that might be here. I can look for any parts that might have fallen off the machine. I can also look for maybe there's a cat or a dog underneath there. In some cases you may have parked it and got off for lunch, and you might want to look around and see if somebody's asleep under the machine. Anybody ever had that happen before? No? Okay. But when I go out, the first thing I like to do is I like to come back here on this machine, and they've all got these master switches. We can turn that off right there. Now that kills the electricity of the machine, so I know if I'm on one side looking at the ground or in between the tandems looking at something, I know that nobody's going to get up there and crank it up and take off. Because everybody's been in a position where something's happened, they bring you to a machine, we got to get on this machine, take off and go. Now Russell did one other thing too. He came over here and he opened the door and put his safety vest up here or his lunchbox. And you can kind of claim the machine as yours. That gives somebody else another opportunity to look twice before they crank the machine up. So once we start, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at tires. We're going to look at nuts and bolts. Like Marv's got, we have transmission, engine oil, water fluid separator, air cleaner, and our engine coolant all on the same side right here. Our hydraulic sight glass is right here. So most of your manufacturers are getting this done where you can look on one side for what you need to do. And once you've checked that, you want to check your cutting edges, loose nuts, bolts, cracks on welds. Y'all have heard about all that, right? So we won't keep repeating the same thing, but you need to do that every time. But one thing on this machine that we do have is what they call a cross-slope system. Has anybody ever heard about that before? What? Cross-slope system. Machine control guidance, lasers, GPS. You've heard of GPS systems before, right? Never run. Okay, never run one. All right, that's why we've got this here. This system can be put on the Caterpillar, it can be put on the John Deere, it can be put on the Volvo. It can be put on anything you've got existing. Part of your program today was how to maintain a proper slope on your road, right? 4%. Does everybody have a 4% road on all their roads that they blade? Right, yeah, we all got that. Yeah, okay. Well, this machine is good for counties. I know we got some guys from Brazoria County here, right? Didn't I see a Brazoria County truck? Y'all got a cross-slope system, right? Has that improved your roads? Has it improved your operating? Or maybe not improved your operating, but made your operating easier. Okay. You go out there, it took you a couple times maybe to get everything where you needed it, right? But you got it at the slopes you want to. Now the beauty about this system is you can go anywhere you want to with this machine with a cross-slope system on there. You don't need a laser transmitter, you don't need a GPS receiver, you don't need any other outside support. So wherever you go, you can take this thing and dial it into 3%, 4%, 5%, and you can get your grade on the road. May not take the first time, may take the second time, may take 2 or 3 passes, right? But you can get it done. Now this machine, to do that, we've got 3 sensors. We've got a rotation sensor here. We also have a slope sensor on the back side of the blade over here. And up in here, there's a main fall sensor. This way, and this way. So you can rotate any way you want to and still maintain that slope. Now, this machine has got automatic controls, and one thing you can do, everybody's going to new technology. If you don't get it, you're going to get it. If you don't get it, you're going to not be as productive as everybody else is going to be. But with this cross-slope system, what it enables us to do is we're going to set our elevation on the road when we lower and raise the blade, right? So when you get to the ditch, you start pulling the dirt out, you're putting the elevation on that road. To get the slope, you want to angle your blade at the right slope. We can put one side in automatic. So as we're going down the road, all we got to do is watch the right side for our elevation. We raise it and lower it, and this side will follow. So we set a 4% slope in, and we control the right side. We're going to kick the dirt up on the left side to the center of the road, but it's automatically going to do it. So you're just working one side of the handle, one side of the blade, and you're steering with the other side. Makes it a whole lot easier. All these machines have got safety features in them. Does anybody know, or can you name any safety features on the machines? Handrails. Handrail steps, backup alarms, mirrors. If you had a fire extinguisher on there, that would be a safety feature. And an important safety feature that always gets overlooked is the operator's manual. Has everybody read the operator's manual? Everybody go? Yeah, okay. In the operator's manual, you'll find service points in there, you'll find service intervals in there. You'll find a lot of times they have operating techniques in the operator's manual. So you need to check and make sure you have your operator's manual in the machine. If you don't, call your manufacturer and you can get one. So that's all I got if nobody has any questions. I guess we're done.